Right then, so the Honor V20 and the Nova 4 from Huawei have both recently been released here in China, soon to be released internationally. So let's have a look at the V20 from Honor and the Nova 4 from Huawei. Obviously, Honor is a Huawei sub-brand, so these phones are going to have a lot of the same materials on the outside and the inside. When I got both of these phones in the hand, I was really pressed to find any physical differences between them. If you're looking at the front of the phones, obviously you get that awesome hole punch in the top left hand corner. Both phones have this design. I would say that the front screen on both of these phones is literally exactly the same. The specs sheet might have slight differences here and there, but honestly, when you've got these two phones in front of you, you'll be pressed to find a single difference between them. So they both have that new design, the no notch front screen, that really cool hole punch in the corner. Both of the screens are LCD. As far as I can tell, they're the same screen. It's a 6.4 inch screen, 1080 by 2310 on both phones. They are both LED screens. Now, it's 2019. These phones still have the LCD. A lot of manufacturers and a lot of people now want the AMOLED screen. Actually, when I had both of these phones in my hand, they follow a similar color scheme. The colors, even for an LCD, are really poppy, really bright, and really vibrant. Contrast is also really, really good. It's not gonna be as good as an AMOLED screen. Those blacks aren't gonna get as deep black as an AMOLED, but for an LCD screen, both of these do really, really well. 398 ppi. I was really impressed with both of these phones when looking at them in person, just how sharp they were. So for the front screen, they're both going to be exactly the same. Moving on to the operating system, they both come with Android 9.0 out the box. The operating system that the Nova 4 and the V20 will have will obviously be slightly different, but honestly, it's very, very minor differences. When I was flicking through apps, opening things up, going back to the home screen, it was a really good experience on both phones. One difference I did notice between the Nova 4 and the V20 was that the Huawei phone, the Nova 4, just had a swipe up to go back to the home screen, much like the iPhone. The V20 from Honor still had the capacitive buttons at the bottom. So you had a back button, a circle home button in the middle, and a square app loader where you could see a screen of apps and swipe up to close them. Both of these systems work well. I guess it's just personal preference to which one you want to use. One of the main differences between these phones is the processor used. So the V20 from Honor has the new Huawei Kirin 980 chipset, whereas the Nova 4 keeps the 970 chipset. The V20 also has the updated GPU. Honor says that the new CPU, the 980, has a 75% better performance than the old 970. They also couple that with a new GPU, which they say is 46% better than the old one in the Nova 4. Although those figures sound amazing, when you're using both of these phones day to day, you're probably not going to notice any real difference between the performance. There are some features that the V20 has because it uses that new chipset over the Nova 4. We'll get onto those in a second. Other internals to note, slightly different between them. The Nova 4 from Huawei does support external SD cards up to 512 gigabytes. The V20 does not. The Nova 4 comes with 8 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigs of storage, and of course you can use an SD card. The V20 has slightly more options. You can opt for a 6 gigabyte or an 8 gigabyte RAM version, both with 128 gigs of storage, or you can have an 8 gigabyte version with 256 gigabytes of storage. I guess because the V20 doesn't offer external memory card support, they just give you a few more options with memory. When I was trying out the selfie camera in the shop, honestly, I was hard pressed to see any difference between these two, and in fact, on the specs sheet, they're virtually the same as well. They both have a 25 megapixel selfie camera, which is super sharp. One of the sharpest selfie cameras I've ever seen. I know the screen is an LCD and not an AMOLED, but just taking selfie pictures, I was really impressed at how well the image was reproduced. They both have HDR mode, they both have 1080p video. The Nova 4 from Huawei has electronic image stabilization, whereas the V20 doesn't carry any stabilization whatsoever. It may be something to watch out for because having no image stabilization in that front camera will make it much harder to actually take good images. Both cameras are at f2. The only difference I can see between them is that the Nova has the image stabilization. The back cameras do have some differences, probably the biggest differences between the two phones. On the V20, the camera is positioned horizontally, whereas on the Nova, it's positioned vertically. They do look very, very similar, although I'll probably have to give the prize to the Nova 4. It just looks slightly better than the V20 version. The cameras on the inside are different as well. Actually, they both use a 48 megapixel sensor from Sony. It's the same sensor, and when I was testing these out, my god, the images are crazy sharp. Some of the brightest and sharpest images I've seen on any phone. Even flagships, even the iPhone or the S9 really don't compare to just how sharp these images are. That's what you get with a massive 48 megapixel camera. Obviously in low light, it's just gonna suffer a little bit because it does have so many pixels. But I was really impressed with how both of these phones took pictures. So the V20 has that 48 megapixel camera, and it has a supporting 2 megapixel sensor for depth of field information. Meanwhile, the Nova 4 from Huawei has a 3 camera setup. It has that 48 megapixel shooter, the same as the V20, but it also incorporates a 16 megapixel wide angle lens and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. Both shoot 4K video at 30 frames a second, 1080p. Obviously, both have electronic image stabilization. Which one has the better camera? It's so similar, honestly. When I was testing it out, when I was taking photos, both were amazing. If you like taking wider angle shots, then you might want to go with the Nova 4. But something that the Nova 4 doesn't have is Slo-Mo. The V20 does have Slo-Mo, maybe because it's got that new chip that can handle slow motion. It shoots 720p footage at 960 frames per second. That's going to give you some crazy slow-mo. It's a really great feature that the V20 has that the Nova 4 doesn't. Although most of us don't shoot a lot of slow motion, the wide angle lens of the Nova 4 might be more useful overall. In terms of connectivity, both the phones are virtually the same. There are some small differences, but nothing very noticeable. The only thing of note is that the V20 does have NFC and the Nova 4 doesn't have NFC. Depending on where you are, that might be more or less useful. You might really want that, so go with the V20, or if it's not important, it doesn't matter. Both have USB-C type charging, the V20 having a slightly bigger battery at 4000 milliamp hours, but honestly, with real usage, I don't think you're gonna see much difference whatsoever in battery power. Both also have fingerprint sensors on the back, probably exactly the same hardware. They're both positioned in the same place, in the middle of the back. Because the phones aren't huge, it's a really good position on both phones, and they both have a form of Face ID unlocking as well. So what are the main differences between these phones? Probably in the camera hardware, and obviously the V20 having the new CPU, the Kirin 980, with the Nova sticking with the 970. There's also a few other connectivity differences, for example with NFC. The V20 doesn't support external cards, but you can buy the phone with more memory than the Nova 4 anyway. I think for a phone, getting the V20 with 256 gigs of RAM is plenty anyway. In terms of overall hand feel, when I had both of these in my hand, playing around with them, going through apps, they really are virtually the same. Some design differences, for example the camera at the back, but when you're looking at these front on, you would be hard pressed to pick which one is the V20 and which one is the Nova 4. I'm a little bit confused why Huawei have gone the route of building essentially exactly the same phone with some slight differences in hardware and software across both of its brands. Maybe in some markets Honor goes down better and the Huawei brand goes down better. The little differences between them might make you choose one over the other, but honestly, having both of them in the hands, I think they're both going to serve you really, really well. So that's the hardware and software differences for the V20 from Honor and the Nova 4 from Huawei. Both great phones, and I'd be happy to have either one of them.